I envision this as a conversation, although, and somebody told me I'm trying to moderate the immoderables. And I have begun to, I've sent them some questions. And the first question that I'd like to start with is from you, Agnes, because you really bring the perspective of the global South. And I would like you to reflect upon an issue of gender that was important to you in your life, and something that you can tell folks about going into a career in global health.
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning, everybody.
And in 5 minutes.
I'm even going to be brief.
No, Agnes.
No, don't trust me.
Yes.
But all this is okay. And as a Rwandan woman, I cannot talk about gender leadership, gender equality, rights, health, and etc. without talking about my country. Because as a woman, I never fought legally to have the right I had. However, they need a political will and a legal framework. Never forget, without a legal framework, you will not sustain the gain. And even when we had it, through the Constitution, 30% of women in any position of power, if not, elections are cancelled. Fantastic, isn't it? Fantastic. However, because before that, the education of women was not equal of the one of boys. There were not enough women well educated to take the challenge. Okay? So we need the legal framework. We need to change so many things in education and in the culture, because that's the place where we are stuck. Even today, remember, when you go to catechism, first thing they told you, maybe not now, but when I was a young girl, this woman, Eve, she gave the apple, poor Adam. So we have the scene in all the culture have that. Isn't it? We need to fight that. Second thing, poor men, they're educated like that, and they behave as they are educated. They try to be good, they believe they are good. They're not. And I'm going to tell you a story with one of my ministers. It was a couple of years ago. And because they believe I'm talking a lot, it was a gathering, there were many people there, and it just have this very macho reaction in front of everybody when I enter, say, Agnes, come and sit on my knee. I say, no, you are too ugly. And you know what happened? Everybody come and ask me how I can be so disrespectful. And nobody asked him how he was so disrespectful. And I say, okay, I'm sorry, I don't believe I was disrespectful, but let's bring that to top leadership and say, and judge if I have to be pointed because I say that, or the contrary. So they start to reflect on me. We are not going to bring that up. And it was over. But that means in the culture of the powerful men in the sexual field that start by come and sit here, and all the other reflection, be ready to fire back.
She was the minister of Rwanda when people got killed.
And I can tell you many good stories. They're all funny. But some young girls are so ashamed because they are pointed like that. That as women, we need that solidarity to make that really harmful for the men who are doing that. And this is deep in the culture, even in the best countries.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you. Laurie, Now, Laurie Garrett just wrote an amazing review in Lancet of a book on when the big man ruled global health. So I've asked her to say a few words about why the big men ruled global health, and then also share some gender stories in her life. Laurie.
Well, first of all, none of us would be here today if it weren't for Michele and Catherine Burke. Can we please acknowledge this? And another woman that needs to be acknowledged here is Heidi Larson, who's already hard at work preparing for next year's meeting in London. It's really great for me to be back at Stanford. I did research here when I was a graduate student. I had a special kind of NIH fellowship that allowed me to be on multiple campuses as a PhD candidate. So I was at Berkeley and Stanford, and I had the great honor of working here in the laboratory of the Herzenbergs. Some of you that are Stanfordites or immunologists may be familiar with the brilliant career of Lee and Len Herzenberg. It was a kind of situation that was part of why some women got ahead in the sciences, because they were married to another scientist and they worked as a team. And that was, quote, an acceptable way. But nobody would ever saddle Lee with, privilege based on something acceptable. She was one, and is still here on the faculty, one tough broad. I learned a lot from her. One of the things I learned from Lee Herzenberg was that the great honor, if you were a graduate student in those days in immunology, was being permitted to attend the annual Asilomar meeting, which was the big hotshot meeting for immunologists. And Lee showed me women all gave data-rich, meticulous speeches without sweeping conclusions. And men gave the big idea speeches, often without any data. And who did everybody walk away talking about? Those men's speeches. Who got, therefore, encouraged to publish in the Journal of Immunology and so on and so on and so on? The guys that gave the big sweeping speeches. Another person that influenced why I ended up dropping out of my PhD program and going into journalism was Claudia Henry at UC Berkeley, because she sat all of us down, all the graduate students, and said, here's what you need to know. And she had been part of a study that looked at NIH grant receipts based on gender, and showed if you had a female name that was irrefutably female, you were about 50% less likely to get a grant. And if you had a name that was ambiguous, you used initials, or it could be a man's name as well, you were about 25% less likely to get a grant. And if you had a clearly male name, your odds were far greater. And she said, basically, if you're going to continue in the sciences, you have to be prepared to fight every single day of your life, just simply based on your gender. The men were often the leaders in the sciences, and as I moved into journalism, I discovered that was true there as well. I didn't see women getting trained and groomed to be the next managing editor, the next editor-in-chief, the next director of the news operation at NPR, or any of the various places that I worked as a journalist. And when I went out as a war correspondent, it was very clear, though all the women knew, every war correspondent female knows, we face a risk that's different from the men. Because a lot of the people we cover think, and Rwanda has this history, and many you come from countries with this history, think that a woman's body is part of the battlefield. And one way of saying F you to the government of the United States is to use the body of an American woman and violate her. And all of us knew we could never tell our bosses about this. We could never describe this additional risk, because then they would never send us back to the battlefield. And if we didn't go back to the battlefield, we would never advance in our careers. That's just emblematic of what all of you see in every single dimension of what you're struggling with as you go forward. Well, now we're in this odd situation where public health has become a demographically female-dominated field. So is a lot of journalism. So is a lot of fields that we all care about. But just because you dominate in numbers doesn't mean you're at anywhere near parity. A new survey that was published about 5-6 months ago, looking at the United States, shows that the average physician in America who is female earns 27% less than the average male physician, regardless of the discipline, even in specialties that are predominantly female, like pediatrics. So that 30% of males in pediatrics will always earn more than the 70% of females in pediatrics. If we look across where we are in the world landscape right now, let's just we're here in the United States, so let's talk about the US. The NIH, National Institutes of Health, the most powerful scientific institution on the planet, responsible for the majority of all funding of all scientific research in every discipline on Earth, except those funded by the NSF. The director and all 5 deputy directors are male. Among associate directors are half female, that's good news. But the institute directors, which are the most powerful positions, 15 out of 21 are men, and center directors, 4 out of 6 are men. If we look at WHO, 2 female director generals out of 9 in the history. Secretary General of UN, never been a woman. World Bank, never been led by a woman. IMF, for the first time in its history, has a female leader who comes on the heels of an alleged sexual abuser who lost his position. UNICEF has had 1 female leader out of 6. United States, my glorious country, has never had a female leader. And men still clearly dominate Congress, the Senate, and all the key positions in the United States. So just to get to your question, eventually, oh gosh, I'm turning it as if. To get back to the big ideas point, we come from a long legacy in global health of imagining that the big ideas, the things that will attract hundreds of billions of dollars, that will be the real, battle flag, let's all go out and march, and then every single minister of health is going to get dictates from Geneva saying, here's your new targets to try to meet for your country. These big ideas always came from white men, mostly from the United States and Europe. And we only, in the last 15 years, have gotten to the point where there's some diversity in terms of who people are, where they come from. But we're still struggling to have women project big ideas. And what are the attributes of the people who projected these big ideas? First of all, as Jennifer Leaning told us in her wonderful remarks, and as the provost explained, you have to believe in yourself. And I guess it's easier for men to believe in themselves than it is for women, because a lot of guys are more than happy to talk without data backing them up. And they're more than happy to suggest a big idea that actually was somebody else's idea to begin with. And they've just repackaged it. And they're more than happy to knock on the doors of legislatures and of great wealth and say, give me money for this big idea. We're now in a context where most of the big ideas are still coming from men. Bill Gates has more clout and more influence on global health than any single individual alive today. Think about that. This is not a man who ever took any of your classes, ever set foot in a public health meeting before he decided to take on building this foundation. And yet he has more big ideas and influence over the big ideas than any of you here. And I think the challenge is for women to find the inner strength, get less modest, less demure, less worried about how you appeal or appear to the men, and start remembering that there are billions of lives at stake and they're on your watch, and that means you scream, you shout, shove that modesty in the back drawer, and put your big ideas out there.
Yeah.
And yes,
To add something.
Wait. And yes, I just want to say, you're a woman that has had many big ideas. And I was struck when you came here and taught in my class where you said that you actually immunized almost 90% of your young girls with HPV vaccine.
Against the idea of the white man, yeah.
Yes. So I want to ask you, 60% of the women in your parliament, 60% of parliament in Rwanda is women.
Yeah.
How do you do it?
So this is the protection of the legal framework I'm talking to. And there is a dual thing there. Rwanda is proactive. If you don't do that proactively, that means if you don't do a positive discrimination in favor of women, you don't get there. Why? Because everything you have said is not that men are more comfortable to do that. It's just that they're educated like that. It's not that you are less comfortable. It's because you are educated like that. So we need to reverse that with a positive action for that. So, and also you need to stand for what you believe. I never follow the rules of WHO. Never. And if you look,
break rules, break rules.
that's first thing. Follow the rules that suit your people. Follow your instinct. I love that idea. Follow it. Because those rules are always behind the science and what is needed. The second thing is, Tedros have done a great thing. Women cabinet. Now let's go to the next layer. It doesn't have to be cosmetic. We should not upload and forget. We have to upload and watch and make it happen really. Because most of the institutions are putting women there just to show that they are good. But in reality, inside there, you find a woman, secretary, blah, blah, assistant, etc., etc. But in the people who take the decision, we are still not there. So, and that's what the portion of education and culture. We have more than 60% of women in parliament, but we don't have that at mayor level. Okay? The culture and make the woman going and stand and do. And they are stuck with the babies. They are stuck with the kitchen. They are stuck with doing double shift. Shift at home, shift at work. So on top of have more risk, we have double work. Okay? And this should be compensated somewhere.
I'm going to ask people, because you don't often get a chance to ask questions to these women, to step up to the microphone if you have questions. And while you're doing that, I'd like to ask Laurie and Agnes to talk about one thing that you think during this day people should try to get out of this conference, or one point for people young women going into careers in global health. And please walk.
First of all, you need to understand that en français on dit le sexe fort, the strong gender is the woman one. The reality is that for biology, for everything, education pull her down. Just forget it and go for what you are. You are the strongest one. And when there is fire, you are the one there. When there is a problem in the family, you are the one there. So when you have an idea, be the one there.
I think the thing I would love to see be an outcome from this meeting is a kind of networking between everybody in this room and those of you watching online that resolves to come up with really pragmatic solutions to what I think is the primary crisis we face right now in global health, and that is this. Yeah, we're low on money, and that's going to get worse. Yeah, the problems are getting more complex. We're all now breathing asthma-supporting air because of climate change-induced fires that are burning up Northern California. And I just came from hurricane-besotted regions. So, yeah, the challenges are greater. But the answers are not going to come from the traditional ways of circulating ideas and generating solutions in the global health community. And the number one problem we face right now with WHO and with the other major multilateral institutions is that they don't have a mechanism for input from the grassroots. They don't have any mechanism where a smart idea, somebody invents a straw that you can suck through with a filter so you can drink dirty water and not get cholera. Okay? Why doesn't that end up coming all the way to the top of the chain and becoming universally available and promoted around the world? I think we have to figure out a way. You know, Jennifer Leaning told us trust is about learning how to listen and communicate and a two-way sharing, right, with the woman at the most disadvantaged, the refugee woman carrying 3 babies. This is what I would like to see us all walk away with, is how can we listen and incorporate ideas that come from the base?
Thank you. We're really running behind, so we're not going to be able to take all these questions. So we'll take 4 questions, but please be very quickly, and I'll go back and forth. So this lady here.
I'm Radhika Shah. I'm co-president of Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs and advisor to the Sustainable Development Goals Philanthropy Platform. My question is, I actually think women have a lot of big ideas. They often just don't get heard. And I am curious on your thoughts on what is the role of technology these days for a community like this, to connect with the communities Jennifer was speaking of earlier, migrants and refugees, to bring the big ideas with the anchor of the UN Sustainable Development Goals to achieve not just gender parity, but just a better quality life for all? Or is the technology divide too strong, where those women under vulnerable communities don't even have access to the basic infrastructure?
It's really amazing that you're asking that question and we're sitting right here. I was in a meeting about 3 months ago in Mountain View, and we were sitting in an outdoor cafe, and I finally, after about 20 minutes, said, we've been sitting here 20 minutes, and myself and the chef are the only females I have seen. This is a 100% male zone, and it's all about Silicon Valley, and it's about creating apps and about forwarding them in a kind of big ideas way in technology that seems to have adapted very well to testosterone. And finding ways to break through all these new fields that are the new energy, the new money, and the new modes of communication, that's a really important task. One thing I would advise is, let's create bases of social media communication that do not rely on sarcasm, brutality, snide remarks, harassment, and all the other elements that seem to be the key to becoming popular on Twitter.
We're only going to be able to take one more question. I'm really sorry. We're going to have time for back and forth. I promise you, later on.
Good morning. My name is Miriam, and I'm the director of the Trauma Awareness Project in Mexico. I have a question for Vice-Chancellor Agnes. How can you use a legal framework to address sociocultural challenges in underserved communities of developing countries when the governmental structures are known for being corruptive or abusive against these underserved populations?
You can do that by first making participation a tool of doing great legal framework. And when you got that participation, then you are obliged to include community, and in community the woman will be there. So you need to trick the system. Don't go, and also it depends of what is your setting. I don't have the golden response for you, but you need to find a way to bring those women, and the best way is human right of participation. So you go to the most brave vocal men, the one who have the most testosterone, you say, you'll be great if you manage to put participation as a new thing to do. And after that, you...
Thank you, ladies. I thank these wonderful rock stars.